This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Sheelagh Fogarty.
Hello there, good afternoon to you. Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader, has called for a national inquiry into grooming gangs, rape gangs, as she's called them. And this is, I assume that her call for this is off the back of Elon Musk's kind of stalking style, endless tweets about the subject aimed specifically at Jess Phillips, who's the safeguarding minister. Because Jess Phillips some months ago declined to organise or pitch for in government a national inquiry into the grooming gangs. And, you know, one of the reasons that she gave at the time was that the local authorities themselves, where there had been clear failings, as outlined in the J report 10 years ago, that the local authorities themselves needed to look at what they got wrong and put it right, rather than vital government time be spent on a national investigation, national inquiry into it. Now, you may have your views one way or another on that, but that's essentially the story. I don't think for a second, I don't really want our conversation to be about Elon Musk. I'm just fascinated at how he is using this particular story for his own agenda, an agenda around Muslims, an agenda around diverse populations and how we handle cohesion and that kind of thing. He is not interested, I don't believe for a second, in the well-being of the girls, mostly now women, but any child being sexually exploited in the UK. I don't think he has active concern for them or a desire to do anything directly for them. I think he's using this story for some reason, I guess because, 6 months on from the 10th anniversary of the J report, it's somehow crossed his desk and he's decided to use it to go on and on about Muslims and to go on and on about the state favouring Muslims, no matter how much they harm your children. That's essentially his approach. Now, there's no. I say Muslims, Asian. Not all of the people involved are Muslims, but this is the point. He is reducing, it seems to me, the whole story into a lever that he can use for his own interests and his own political interests, certainly in America, but globally as well. He's talking about bringing down the British government and that kind of thing, but he's really focusing on and creating a campaign, almost a hate campaign, against Jess Phillips. Well, not almost a hate campaign against Jess Phillips. Now, that aside, I don't think for a second he is interested in the well-being of those people. Not for a second. And, these claims on Twitter that not a single person has gone to jail, completely untrue. Many people have gone to jail. One man was given a 35-year sentence. The idea that nothing has been done about this is wrong. I mean, my God, the history of it and the story of it is a catalogue of failings that have, to a degree, and it's that we'll get on to a degree, been addressed and must be looked at constantly to make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen again or can't happen again. And in those corners where it is or might be, we do something about it rather than leave young girls in particular or young boys who are sexually exploited to their fate. That really should be something that as a nation we are battling against. And you might think that's an argument for a national inquiry into grooming gangs, into the sexual exploitation of children. Do we need one? 0345 6060 973, the number to call. David Greenwood joins me, head of child abuse of the Child Abuse Department at Switalski's Solicitors, who represents victims of sexual grooming gangs. Good afternoon to you, David. Thank you for joining me.
Hi. Good afternoon.
This whole push for a national inquiry that's been prompted, I think, by Elon Musk's tirades on Twitter. Where do you stand on that?
If a government wants to pump a load of money into an inquiry to demonstrate to the public what a lot of people in the field already know, then fine. If they want to do that, I think personally the money would be best spent implementing the recommendations of the national inquiry that we had, and it's the section on organised exploiters that took place in 2020 and reported in 2022. The inquiry had lots of different subsections. This was one of them, and it went into a lot of detail on not what had happened, but how local authorities and police responded to the threat of exploiters. And it essentially found that there were some areas of good practice, but mostly it was poor practice around the country.
And a lot of that was about how the children themselves were regarded, wasn't it? That was a central part of it, yeah.
Yeah, it explored how children felt that they'd been responded to and how they were looked after, essentially. But it found mainly that police and local authorities and other agencies were ticking the box by these multi-party meetings, but not actually walking the walk, sort of thing, and were essentially working in silos, using odd standards of risk for categorisation of girls and boys that could fall into exploitation, and police were not disrupting, not gathering enough information on the gangs and not disrupting them enough.
Because there are patterns, aren't there? And there are red flags that if you know your business, either as a police officer, a teacher, a social worker, a parent even, just whoever you are in that child's life, that you can start to see those patterns forming. And the more informed, I guess, all of us are about those patterns, the more likely we are to see a child that needs help and make sure that child gets help.
That's definitely right. That's definitely right from a human perspective. I think what the inquiry brought out was that much better data gathering would have enhanced the ability of statutory services to identify and tackle exploitation where it was starting.
I remember one story about I'm afraid I can't remember today on the top of my head which particular area it was about, because there were a number of cities affected by these grooming gangs, weren't there? Of a young girl being described as AWOL as opposed to missing. And that's a really, people might think that's not particularly different, but you take a very different approach to somebody who you're describing as AWOL to somebody you're describing as missing, don't you?
Yes, you do. And for instance, a real bugbear of mine, having worked in this field for 20 years now, is you find social workers describing children who are being exploited as being at risk of exploitation. Not at risk of exploitation. They are being exploited. They're having sexual offences perpetrated against them. They need to be taken out of that.
And since that original J report into Rotherham, going back 10 years, since then, I think all of us have become more familiar with terms like county lines gangs, for example. And I know there are differences here in what we're talking about, but again, county lines gangs, that can begin as one kid saying to another kid, deliver those drugs, would you, to this address, and then being asked multiple times to do it. And if you don't do it, we'll either rape your sister or rape you, or you'll be attacked. Or it becomes a kind of growing, a sort of worsening issue for the exploited child, doesn't it? It can go in myriad directions.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap. It mainly in the limited extent to which the inquiry looked at that, it was moving from criminal exploitation into sexual exploitation. Yeah, that direction.
Both of which are about control, aren't they?
Yeah, it's overlap, and both are just as damaging.
And like I say, I don't really want the conversation to focus on Elon Musk, but what he seems to have just fermented, I think is the word, on social media about this issue, is a sense that we haven't even looked at it as a country, which you and I know is nonsense, that it hasn't been looked at. There was a time when it wasn't looked at and should have been. There was a time when too many people were ignoring it. How much more work do we still have to do, would you say, in relation to taking action quickly and understanding what we're looking at?
Great question. Thank you for asking it, Sheelagh. We are behind the curve, I would say, on exploitation, both criminal and sexual exploitation. We need to get ahead of the curve. We need to, harness the power of specialists and best practice. We need to get out of these silos that we're in with 42 different police forces and God knows how many local authorities doing slightly different things. We need a centralised. Well, Professor Jay's overall report came up with this kind of central idea of a super regulator, a child protection authority, which would promulgate best practice and guidance to all institutions looking after children or responsible for children, and would eventually enforce that. That should be brought in as soon as possible. That's something that the government can do. Start off this new super regulator so that everyone is singing from the same song sheet.
And would you give that super regulator powers to, I don't know, impose sanctions of some sort on a council that wasn't, or a police force that wasn't delivering at that standard?
Exactly. Eventually, it would be like the health and safety executive, if you know how that operates. It gives out guidance, warns people if they're not doing it, gives them notices to say, look, do this, do that. Doesn't prosecute them unless it's in one of the most egregious cases. So by raising the standard gradually, we can work towards a national standard of child safeguarding. That would cover exploitation, criminal exploitation, sexual exploitation, and all other forms of child abuse by institutions, at least.
One of the things that some of the children reported at the time of the original Jay inquiry into Rotherham, was that the police, when they went to the police, they felt that the police were actively on the side of the men in some way. And that they were, when they went to see them, or they alerted the men to the fact that they were about to be visited by police. They alerted them that there were risks and that kind of thing. Have we openly looked at police corruption in this? Because we've got a fair few of examples of it in the last 40, 50 years, haven't we? Have we looked at that well enough?
You've been doing your homework, Sheelagh.
I like to think so.
Yeah, it was mentioned in a couple of the early trials in Rotherham that officers had been tipping exploiters off and had been essentially threatening witnesses to
make it go away.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and it's been suggested by a number of my clients that police officers in Rotherham were taking bribes from perpetrators and were, in some cases, exploiting the girls. Yeah, there's no finer point to put on it.
Joining the gangs, essentially, in their activities.
Yeah.
Has that been? If the overarching question of our conversation is what still needs to be looked at, is that something that needs to be better investigated?
I would say so. One of the other bugbears that I have is that there's been a lack of accountability in Rotherham with the council and the police. With the council, people were allowed to just leave and have payoffs rather than being put through the employment tribunal system or the disciplinary system.
Shades of Hillsborough.
Yeah. And with the police...
Also South Yorkshire Police.
South Yorkshire Police, yeah. Lots of officers who could have been in the frame were allowed to retire early and escape discipline. The police, I have been pursuing the police to try and get them to investigate particular officers that I'm aware of. And there is some light at the end of the tunnel there. I'm hoping that we'll get there in the next year or 18 months or so.
Interesting. Speak to you again if that happens. Thank you very much indeed, David. Good to have you on the programme. David Greenwood, Head of the Child Abuse Department at Switalski's Solicitors, who represent victims of sexual grooming gangs.